As above, so below, as within, as without. Welcome to Wheel of Ezekiel Astrology Podcast, episode 23, Uranus in Gemini. My guest today is astrologer Dana Solara, also known on her social media as Self-Help Witch. Dana, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Thank you so much. I am great, excited to talk about Uranus and all of the Uranus and Gemini hijinks that we are about to experience in about a week as we record this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a long time coming, but it's like real now that it's like on the doorstep. It's a project I'd started to research and was wanting to do a show, and then, or at least I'm writing about it a long time ago, and it just kind of got away from me. And so now it's kind of like the most urgent thing I think to talk about because it's probably the most important transit of this part of the year, aside from the Saturn and Neptune ingresses to Aries. And then, of course, Pluto and Aquarius that happened before. This is the final movement now of the outer planets that's going to create this new configuration for this new era that we're about to enter with all the outer planets finally making shifts, all into masculine signs too, air and fire. That's another thing to note. So it definitely denotes a very masculine, very external, active quality to it. Whereas in Taurus, Uranus in Taurus the last 7 years or so, it was much more internally directed, maybe, Earth, more materialistic, maybe in a sense. Now moving into air, air having to do with ideas, the whole realm of intellect and communications, invention, things of that nature. But I guess before we get into that, I did want you to just give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to my audience and maybe just talk a little bit about your background in astrology, like how you came to it and like how it found you. Because usually I find astrology finds you rather than you find it. I think,
Yeah.
it's kind of a better way to put it, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, that's totally what happened to me. So the end of 2019, I had a tower moment, the tower card where everything kind of falls apart. And so
Hmm.
I quit drinking and in my sobriety, I discovered I was a massive people pleaser. I was super codependent. I really had no idea who I was. And I was in
Hmm.
therapy and I was doing all the things to try to reconnect with yourself, but something was not clicking. I couldn't go as deep as I wanted to. And I realized I needed a tool that would help me see myself without other people. Because the thing about people pleasing and I'm a Libra rising, which may not be a surprise to anyone,
Yep. Yep.
knowing that that's like a tendency that I have. But the thing about having that predisposition is you see yourself through other people's eyes always. And that was what I was trying not to do anymore. So I came to my birth chart, which I knew existed prior to all of this, but it never like clicked for me. It
Hmm.
just came back into my consciousness at some point in 2020 after I'd been sober for several months. Like maybe that could help me. That seems like a concrete tool that could reflect back some truth to me that I wouldn't
Hmm.
be able to access with a therapist because that's someone else. And I would still be like filtering myself because there's another person here. So at
Hmm.
the end of 2020, I went hard on my chart. Like I just dove so deep into my birth chart. And I knew immediately that like this is going to change my life. It changed my life dramatically right away because I was able to get language for my
Hmm.
experience that I never could get before. Um,
Hmm.
and then, a couple months later, I'm taking Nightlight Astrology's year one program. I start doing readings.
Yeah.
I create Self-Help Witch. End up becoming a co-host for the horoscopes on last one. And so,
It cut out for 1 second there. You said you were a co-host for the Nightlight Astrology,
oh, yeah,
right? Yeah,
sorry
yeah.
about that.
No, no, it's just a
For
connection cut
the
out right when you said that.
horoscope.
So, but yeah, that's actually where I discovered you. Because I've been
Okay.
watching Adam as well. I'm actually a former student too. Funny you mentioned I during 2020 took his year one course as well. I started reading Chris Brennan's book Hellenistic Astrology and pretty much discovered that whole other dimension to astrology because I was looking for something a little deeper than the modern astrology.
Yeah.
There's just some things that didn't quite fit. And well, I discovered my chart in 2019, my true chart as well, because I'd kind of just very loosely and kind of sloppily come across it. And I miscalculated some placements and stuff that didn't quite sit. But then when I found out my true chart, that was like a real moment of clarity that, again, similar to you, not having to filter it through anybody else's books, just like firsthand experience to my own natal template, right?
Yes.
And then wanting to study it more. But anyways, going back to the forecast. That's where I saw you with Adam, and well, and Alex Hormozy as well, right? I believe. Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah, and essentially that's kind of what it led me to want to invite you on here. I've always appreciated your perspectives during those horoscopes, and something about, I don't know, Gemini energy seemed to resonate with you. I don't really know your placements, but I just figured you're a person that maybe intuitively understands Gemini energy from a personal
Yes.
placement to speak upon it. Is
Yes.
that so?
So it's very true. So Libra rising, I have
Mhm.
natal Mars, Jupiter, and Moon in Gemini. Um,
Okay, right.
and Mars and Jupiter are at 0 and 1 Gemini, respectively. So I'm very interested in what Uranus and Gemini is all about because it's going
Oh,
to,
yes.
yeah, right off the bat, like, and I've already noticed it. And I think by the time, I don't know when this will be published, but I tend to notice, especially with the outer planets, just because we've had so many ingresses lately,
Mhm.
you will notice it before the ingress. Like I
Oh,
think,
yeah.
and so if you're
This
out there
last week
listening,
already kind of was and is essentially, it's a teaser to it,
yeah,
Um,
it's in the air right now. So
mhm.
yeah, definitely.
Yep, absolutely. Right. Okay, cool. That's great. I guess let's just go ahead and get into it then.
Let's do it.
Um, but maybe just because I don't want to take for granted, this podcast is kind of meant for people that are beginners as well. So, we're talking about more advanced concepts. So let's not take for granted the significations of Uranus and perhaps even where that all comes from, even linked back to the myth.
Mhm.
Because Uranus, of all the planets, has a very interesting correlation, not so much with Uranus or Uranos, the Greek sky god, who in the myth is overthrown and castrated by Saturn on the behest of his mother Gaia. That's kind of, in a nutshell, the story how that takes place. The symbolism there isn't really astrologically congruent, you could say, but as famously noted by Richard Tarnas in his book Cosmos and Psyche, which I'm going to read from here shortly. He correlates the Prometheus myth with Uranus, the archetype in astrology, which fits much, much better, almost perfectly, you could say. So
Yeah.
maybe let's start there. If you want to maybe go into the myth of Prometheus and all that signification archetypally, and then maybe tie it into the archetype astrologically. Uh,
Okay, yeah. So I don't know what you're going to read from Tarnis because definitely, if anybody out there wants to really go deep on this, this is where you want to go. You want to go to Richard Tarnis, go to the index, Cosmos and Psyche,
this
find
is the book
your,
right here. Yep,
yep.
yep. It's
And
your manual right there.
is only five. I mean, the book itself is several hundred pages, but the section we're talking about is only like 5 pages. So definitely
Yeah.
worth the read. But as you were saying, and I am going to butcher the Greek. Like you nailed that.
Oh,
The
okay,
Greek
well, I'm
Uranus.
not very good about myths either. Yeah, right. It's
Yeah, so
I mean, just
the
the essence of the message is mainly to get to, not, I mean, not
right.
necessarily every detail about about the mythology, but more or less what does Prometheus represent as like the story of him bringing fire to mankind, right?
Right.
Is the first starting point of that?
So Prometheus was a Titan, and he was one of the Titans that helped overthrow the gods. And one of the ways he did that was by providing fire to humans. So the general significations, like why we would say Uranus is like Prometheus, is that it's innovative. It's a breakthrough moment. It's because if you think about fire and what that represents, it's a spark.
Hmm.
It ignites something within us. And
Hmm.
so I tend to think about Uranus, the astrological Uranus, less as like a tower card moment, although it could be. It could be that, but it for me it's really more about the new insight, the new awareness, the
It's a
new
metaphor, right? It's a
yeah.
metaphor for knowledge. Yeah, like exactly where you're going with this. Basically, the bringing the fire to the gods, allegorically, you could say, is bringing a knowledge to mankind that raised the consciousness of man above just the regular animal instinctual nature and consciousness. So giving it the ability to reason, teaching him the arts and sciences, and then the fire itself, in a literal sense, the ability to, survive, essentially to be able to cook their food, to have warmth for protection too, because the fire in a tribal setting was of utmost importance. Like you would have fire watchers to not let the flame go out,
Mhm.
somebody on duty, because the survival of the entire tribe or village, depended on that, somebody keeping that flame going. So in a sense, in a broader sense, it has to do with that kind of innovation and all the other things that fire did to lift humanity into a higher quality of life.
Yeah.
Going right.
And if anyone listening, I think what can help you understand the principle of Uranus very well is if you look back at your chart and see where you've had contact with transiting or to your natal
Hmm.
Uranus. Because what you're going to see is those were moments where your mind was broken open,
Hmm.
a situation. And what's interesting about it too, at least in my own personal research, is you see how actually you felt squeezed, which is weird because you think that's a Saturn experience of feeling constricted, but
Hmm.
you need that first in order to have the breakthrough. Right. It's been so many years since I've seen The Matrix, but it does feel like The Matrix, where all of a sudden he's like, oh shit, it's a Matrix. Like that's what the Uranus experience is to me.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, it also activates just because all placements aren't necessarily active at all time, as I
Hmm.
spoke about in my most recent episode on the annual profections. So when you have a profection house year where maybe Uranus is natally placed, that can indicate a sort of a rebelliousness, maybe, or a sort of a revolting against whatever conditioning has been imposed on you, and kind of breaking out of the box, and even just thinking for yourself, kind of coming about, like that light bulb moment of just kind of individuating, sort of like getting hit with that lightning of inspiration, and kind of just coming out of some kind of indoctrinated maybe mode of thinking, or or just essentially just seeing yourself as an individual, expressing yourself in a way that maybe is a bit eccentric, maybe a little different, counter normative in a sense. Like I could see that for myself when I was like 16. I was in a Uranus year, or at least Uranus was natally in that house for me that year. And being in high school, I was kind of an outcast kid, kind of the odd one, you could say, in my whole demeanor of expression. So that's one thing I take away from that. So later on in life, like you're saying with transits as well, be maybe a harsher transit, like a square, can mean you experience circumstances that are just very like the rug gets pulled under you, something that's very unexpected, because that's a very Uranus signature, the sudden and unexpected things that occur, that come about.
Yep.
Not causing it, because I don't necessarily believe that planets cause things. They're just indicators. They're like a clock that's telling you what time it is. So it's telling you
Totally.
it's Uranus time to shake things up. And so
Yep.
he'll shock you with that. And it's again to the tower. I like it that you brought the tower in your story, because it's the tower struck with lightning. Though that card is associated with Mars, traditionally there is a Uranian undertone to it, you could definitely
Okay.
say,
Yeah.
in that whole archetype. But anyway, continuing, let's see. I wanted to get into maybe, well, let's see. A few facts about Uranus. I wrote down this just because it's interesting to know a little bit about the planet. It was the first planet to be discovered with the aid of a telescope, which already in itself is a piece of technology, and that's something Uranus is all about, tech and innovation. So just the fact that it was discovered using technology is very, very significant. It was discovered on March 13th of 1781 by astronomer William Herschel.
March
Actually,
13th.
that's
What?
your
That's my birthday.
it's your
Obviously
birthday.
not in 1781, but
Yeah, a couple hundred years later. Yeah,
okay.
interesting. Okay,
Interesting.
your Iranian signature right there. Right, cool. That's. I knew there was a reason why I thought you specifically for this show, because I do that. I specifically plan shows around a guest that I think would fit really well, because I think the energy and synergy for a conversation has to be very precise. So anyway, interesting. That's okay. Something to note there. I didn't actually know that. And interesting. Okay, cool. So yeah, William Herschel was the one who discovered it. And actually the planet was named Herschel for a long time, until the name Uranus was settled on, even though many other names were thrown out too. But to the point, it was discovered, well, or the discovery of it was in itself revolutionary, because it broke the boundaries of the, until that point in time, perceived limits of the solar system and the cosmos, which ended at Saturn, which was the gatekeeper. There was nothing perceived to be beyond the gates of Saturn. He was uh, the final ring. The fact that he had 7 rings, it's like one ring to rule them all. He was essentially as far out as you could go. So breaking that perception, shattering it, as Uranus does, right? Shatters our perceived notions or assumptions about things, that there are other planetary bodies and worlds beyond that. So uh, there you go. Just the actual way the planet was discovered already gives us a huge clue as to what the planet signifies in astrology.
Mhm.
It also has about an 84-year orbit cycle. So, you know, a couple people will live to their Uranus return. It's maybe rarer than, you know, everybody, of course, lives to a Saturn return, probably a second Saturn return. Uranus, you know, we'll see. Some people do. And yeah, that's a very revolutionary moment, I'm sure, uh, for people that have lived that far. But anyways, it also indicates among the planets in the well, it's indicated among the solar. What distinguishes it from other planets in the solar system, is what I'm trying to say, is that it's rotating on a tilt. So essentially, what would be the north and south poles of it are actually where the equators would be of other planets. So it's literally tilted on its side as it spins on, and it has an axis tilt of 97.77 degrees as well. So another unusual thing about it, which is another teaser to what it means, to what it represents. It's the planet of eccentrics, of unusual things. It's the outsider for sure. It also represents the individual, so expressing yourself in an individual way that's different. So, you know, that can definitely show up in a chart, depending on what configurations, like Uranus in the first house, or let's say conjunct the ascendant. You know, I've met some very interesting people that have that placement. So
Yeah.
anyway, I guess now maybe it would be a good place to read just briefly a few of the things that Taranis says about it, just because I love the way he words it. It's just very masterfully written, and I just don't know that I can necessarily articulate it as well. So I'll just do that, and then we can kind of riff off that, if that sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Hmm. For some reason, I don't like writing in books, so I didn't actually highlight it because I just don't like marking books up. So it's taking a second to actually find the actual paragraph I wanted to start on here.
That's okay.
Sorry about that. All right, let's start here. So Uranus is empirically associated with the principle of change, rebellion, freedom, liberation, reform, and revolution, and the unexpected breakup of structures, with sudden surprises, revelations, and awakenings, lightning-like flashes and insights, the acceleration of thoughts and events, with births and with new beginnings, with intellectual brilliance, cultural innovation, technological invention, experiment, creativity, and originality. In addition to the occurrence of sudden breakthroughs and liberating events, Uranus transits are linked to unpredictable and disruptive changes. Hence, the planet is often referred to as the cosmic trickster. Another set of themes associated with Uranus is a concern with the celestial and the cosmic, with astronomy and astrology, with science, the esoteric knowledge, and with space travel and aviation. With respect to personal character, Uranus is regarded as signifying the rebel and the innovator, the awakener, the individualist, the dissident, the eccentric, the restless, and wayward. These various qualities are considered to be so pronounced in persons born with prominent Uranus and expressed so conspicuously in a person's life during Uranus transits that there seems to have been no significant disagreement among astrological authorities for at least the past century. And these characteristics reflect the archetypal nature of the planet Uranus. All right, well, that's kind of a basic description, we could say, to go on with that. So now that we've stated that, let's maybe review a few of these occurrences throughout history. So I want to start with the most recent transit of Uranus in Gemini, which was between the years 1941 and 1949. Um, which, just something to mention that I heard in the podcast, is in armed conflicts, there was always, this is in regards to the United States, by the way, in armed conflicts, there was always an aggressor with Uranus in Taurus that lost whatever war came into being in Uranus in Gemini. So the British would correspond to the Revolutionary War for the United States, then the Confederates in the Civil War, the Germans for World War I after the sinking of the Lusitania, which was essentially the event that led to the Americans joining the war effort, and then the Japanese for World War II, which of course famously, due to the attacks of Pearl Harbor, was what dragged the United States into that conflict. But anyways, going back to 1941 to 1949, I see here some themes of decolonization, nuclear development, the rise of fascism, and then also anti-fascist resistance, World War I and World War II, and then the women's movement, and then later a greater acknowledgement post-war due to societal shifts of the roles of women taking on jobs traditionally only done by men, such as working in factories and helping to serve the war effort. So essentially, a kind of a commending and a recognition of women's value coming after this, that eventually led to the later phases of the feminist movement and women's rights for, voting and all the other things that came of that. This is kind of the inception point of that,
Yeah.
because they essentially it kind of provided an opportunity for women to kind of prove themselves in a way, just due to circumstance, because there weren't men around to do a lot of these jobs, right? So they filled in, and essentially then there was that recognition of that, which is a very important Uranus Gemini signature there, I see. Also, some challenging of the traditional in terms of sparking revolutions, as well as for the later civil rights movement too. That was another thing. Rights in general, just for maybe minority classes that were still not as recognized, or didn't have equal footing, let's say, with other parts of society.
Yeah.
Did you have any comments you want to make on this period of history?
So I will say for me, and you asked me on to talk about this, right? But I think more about like the archetypal themes. And I think it is interesting to look because this is how we get the thing with Uranus is it's I think one of the hardest planets to predict for
Sure.
because of how it's nature, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And so it's one that I think is so helpful to look at the past. And I also think we could really take that information and then think about, well, what does it mean that Uranus is in Gemini, is in Mercury's masculine home,
Yep.
mutable air. And a
Hmm.
lot of the things you were speaking to reminded me of the signification of like social development
Hmm.
and the idea of a dialogue being really important. And
Hmm.
we're exchanging ideas back and forth in order to clarify something, in order to get at an idea more clearly. And also the fighting. Like, I think we can't deny the fact, like, as we said before we started recording, or maybe it was
Hmm.
after, I don't know, that
Hmm.
yes, there's war here. Like we can see that pattern pretty clearly. And
Hmm.
so there's these opposing viewpoints kind of going back and forth.
Hmm.
And I think that's something that we can absolutely see, not just from a violent perspective of war, but also here at home, right? Like what
Hmm.
you were saying about the progress of women's movements, of minority groups kind of gaining traction. I
Hmm.
believe Brown versus the Board of Education was actually after this, but I could see how we were building toward that, right? Like
Yes.
there's a dialogue going on at
Hmm.
this time around um, who gets what.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's another point you bring to mind here. Whatever starts in Uranus and Gemini is always carried over into Uranus and Cancer. And the same thing with now Uranus and Taurus, things that started there. Um, there's echoes of that are going to carry into Uranus and Gemini, which is going to essentially magnify it and possibly bring it fully into fruition. Like, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but like the idea of alternative currencies and, cryptocurrencies, for example, that seems like a more Uranus and Gemini thing, though, of course, with Taurus, there's the correspondence that Taurus has to do with money and resources. So kind of
Mhm.
planting the seed there and maybe reaping the actual end result of the actual transition of what actually becomes of that will happen in
Yeah.
Uranus and Gemini. And then going back to speaking about the war, particularly relevant for the United States, I think just because the theme of war coming up every time Uranus comes back to Gemini is also due to the fact that Mars is also natally in the United States Sibley chart. I can actually maybe share the chart right now.
Yeah.
Let's see. That's another. That's partly, I think, why that always seems to be a major theme here. Okay, can you see it?
Uh, I see that you've started sharing this. There we go. Yes. Now
Okay, it takes a second. Okay, yeah. But yeah, so here we see Uranus is natally at 8 degrees Gemini. This is the United States Sibyl chart, the most recognized one. And then Mars at 21 degrees. I have an interesting comment to make later on about the transits that will be coming up in regards to this that maybe I'll go ahead and mention here in a minute, because it's certainly going to be significant, when transiting Uranus now finally reaches 21 Gemini and conjuncts natal Mars. And also when Mars, transiting Mars, comes around next time and conjuncts Uranus in Gemini.
hmm
Uh, let's see if I can actually find that. Let me stop sharing it. Yeah, I actually just found this last night. I was just doing research and I didn't even realize all this. And it's a hugely significant thing that's kind of way in the future, but nonetheless, something to think about. Okay, so yeah, on July 4th, 2026, transiting Mars and Uranus, both transiting planets, will be conjunct at 3 degrees Gemini. So this is once Uranus is freshly back into Gemini to stay, because later on this year, after it ingresses, it'll retrograde back to Taurus and then finally re-enter for good in 2026. So July 4th, look at that on the 4th of July itself. Another significant, no coincidence there, thing. So both natally, but both transiting will conjunct at 3 degrees of Gemini, right as the solar return of the United States is taking place too. And then the other really striking one is Uranus will exactly conjunct natal Mars at 21 degrees Gemini, and it's 21 degrees and 23 minutes. So I actually found the exact one, down to the minute of Gemini, and simultaneously oppose the ascendant at 21 degrees Sagittarius on May 17th of 2031.
Mm.
So yeah, that's going to be a day, whatever actually happens. Goodness.
It's gonna be a day.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. Saturn will also at this point be in Gemini. It's going to be at 10 degrees Gemini, so just separating from a conjunction to natal Mars, which is at 8 degrees Gemini.
Yeah.
So bring that Saturnian tone in there. So I mean that kind of tones it already as a kind of a darker, restrictive, very Saturnian um, energy already. Aside with Uranus conjunct Mars. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
the country already could look really different within a year from now. So who's to say in like another 7 years or so from now what everything's going to be? New
We could
character.
never predict. We could
We
never
can't.
predict
That's why
it.
I'm speaking of something that I have no idea to. I can't ever really give any other context toward this except just the very basic astrological signatures I'm seeing here. So there may be brand new characters that are on the scene at this point, and it could be that the characters that are now running on the political stage or running the military or whatever are just going to be exited by this point. I mean, just every 10 years or so, new figures come about, right? So right now, just a completely unknown figure could still be, being groomed or upright or coming into prominence.
hmm
That will maybe be a significant figure, because oftentimes it does manifest through a specific individual. Like right
Mm-hmm.
now, I mean, I'm not the first one to say this, but Donald Trump with his Sun Uranus conjunction in Gemini is very much an archetypal expression of this energy for the United States and the world, of course. So
Yeah, absolutely.
so yeah.
I think one thing to keep in mind is the energy of Gemini is of like asking questions and critiquing and experimenting. So I think a lot of what is going to fuel or like be the beginning, we'll start to see this manifesting through questioning,
Hmm.
right? What do we do about this? What do we do about that? How do we approach this? And I think the best case scenario is that there's some kind of productive dialogue, like that helps us get somewhere because it can be productive. Like it doesn't have to be destructive, even though a lot of what we're
Hmm.
talking about is destructive.
Yeah,
And violence is destructive, but there can be a healthy debate as well.
for
And
sure.
I personally would argue that like that's something we really need to be able to do that we're not great at, as a
Hmm.
country. And anyway, I think that that's one thing I'm looking forward to is to not just think critically, but to have a dialogue about those critical questions.
Certainly. Yeah. Well, Gemini very much encourages dialogue, and that's a very signature nature of it. So I think a lot of important conversations will finally arise to the forefront, and maybe new voices will be heard as well.
Mhm.
Though with kind of that dual signature, oftentimes for something new to emerge, of course, you needed the destruction of the previous. So the old system has to fully collapse for the new system to finally arise. So that's part of that dual nature too of Gemini. It's kind of that transitional phase that, it's just inevitable in terms of that Uranus will quickly strike and uh, essentially make something irrelevant to bring in the next thing. It's got that whole
Right.
quality to transform in a different way than Pluto. But actually, with that, Pluto is going to be in trine to Uranus as well during this going into 2027. So working together, and then also with Neptune, you have to look at all the other configurations because these planets don't necessarily work in isolation. The entire chart
Right.
is active at all times. So definitely the Saturn Neptune in Aries is going to be a very important piece that's kind of initiating this phase. Then maybe when Saturn moves into Taurus, we're going to see another bit of that phase too. It's going to be incremental, as well as Uranus working its way through the decans of Gemini. It's also going to give it a different flavor. I don't necessarily want to get into all that now because that's a lot to get into, and I didn't necessarily prepare to talk about that today. But maybe in the future, I know other astrologers have gone into that work, and it's all very interesting because we can get into sub rulers and all that. But
Yeah.
I like what you're saying because you talk more archetypally, though I do want to briefly go into a little bit of the
Let's do
history
it.
context for the 1858 to 1866 transit, which was the one um, that came right after that, or before that, I guess you could say. Was that right? Let's see. Did I didn't skip one, I don't think.
No, that sounds right.
Yeah. Because I just said, yeah, the first one was the 1940s, right? Okay, yeah. So yeah, so that would have been World War II. So yeah, now we're at the Civil War, which is the very very Gemini. There's the split and unification of a nation, speaking specifically of the United States, but then also in Italy there was the uh, Rigo Ri, Risorgimento is what it was called, which is it took place in 1861, which was the unification of Italy. That was when the movement started, that eventually ended with the Kingdom of Italy choosing Rome as its capital. So other countries too were having these kind of revolutionary moments of, maybe split and then unification. Uh, Many other countries also had reforms, such as one wants to look into Russia's history, Austria, Mexico, India, China, um, many others to not get off track. But it was a global phenomenon that was taking place. Then also continuing the theme of women's rights with figures like Mary Wollstonecraft in England, and then Mary E. Tillotson in the US that had to do again with the women's movement, maybe the beginning of the first wave of feminism. I don't know the history extensively, but just in my research, their names came up as figures that or at
Hmm.
least were helping to start that. And then the abolition movement, of course, which was, of course, one of the crux reasons for the Civil War, with figures like John Brown leading the slave raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859. So that theme of revolt and rebellion, literally a man that was very opposed to slavery. I mean, he was a white man, right? They didn't believe in slavery and was very opposed to it and wanted to end it with violence. So again, that Mars signature there, actually rounding up slaves at the time and actually riding with them to raid an actual military facility. So that's a very Uranus signature there with
Yeah. That theme of rebellion.
yeah, revolution, but conviction from coming from a moral place. So I mean, there was
Mhm.
definitely whether you agree with him or not for it. I mean, the guy was acting in authenticity. That's that lightning flash of inspiration to just do something as crazy as it may seem. And he was hung for it too. So, he was willing to die for it. So it's that revolutionary act to the point of death, even, which you'll see, oftentimes,
Yeah.
that whole theme of war. I mean, I think that's part of the whole signature of the Uranus and Mars uh, co-presence, not exact conjunction, that always the Uranus return corresponds with very Martian events too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and and then also have themes of the advance of communications. For example, the establishment of the first transcontinental mail service in 1858 in the US, which connected the East and West Coast. And then most importantly was also the Transcontinental Railroad line built in 1863 to 1869. So actually connecting the country via railroad, speeding up and innovating. Uranus is a very fast planet. And it's innovating travel, through technology, right? So
Yeah.
the first rechargeable battery too, I just recently learned this was also invented in 1859 by French physicist Gaston Planté. I think that's how you pronounce the name. A couple other technology and communications examples I have here. The first successful demonstration of the telegraph system in the United States was in 1843. However, the transcontinental telegraph cable was completed in 1861. The transatlantic telegraph cables were also laid that year. And after several failings, in July of 1866, the third cable was laid from the Anglo-American Cable House. Wait, this took place on the 13th of July of that year. And essentially, I'm just kind of skimming here to see the more relevant notes I took. I always over prepare here. So
Okay.
1865 was also the retrieve. Essentially, not to read this whole long thing here, basically it was just instigated, and finally there was an actual connection between the the Atlantic coast of the United States and Europe, and they were able to send telegrams across. So again, communications being sped up. And then they actually, a funny slogan that came about was 2 weeks to 2 minutes. So the idea of that messages took 2 weeks to arrive, now down to 2 minutes. So that idea of speed, again,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
communications, very Uranian. As primitive as it may seem to us now to have text that we can just send it in an instant, you've sent a message to anybody in the world, essentially, right? But still, this is kind of the beginnings to that. As we can see in each time Uranus returns, we see new innovation with technology being taken just a little bit further.
Mm-hmm.
Um, let's see. Yeah, do you have any comments about that era? Maybe more from the archetypal perspective, or whatever
Yeah.
thoughts you have on it.
Yeah, it's interesting that we can see the connection of two opposites as well as the division of two opposites. The very first
Hmm.
thing you spoke to was the division of countries and the separating up. And that feels so Gemini to me. The two
Hmm.
sides of this, and we can't see, that makes a lot of sense. But then also we've got um, uh, inventions and communications that help us actually connect our ideas and speak from two different, like physically, two very different sides of the country, for example.
Hmm.
Um, I remembered too something I forgot about the more recent period in the 40s. Like, this is when existentialism really took off. So
Oh,
it,
yes.
and what's interesting about that, we
Mm.
were talking about this on the horoscope recording yesterday, is it's very contrarian. So it asks questions
Mhm.
like, well, if there's being, what if there's nothingness? It's that
Right.
critiquing
Heidegger.
kind of quality of
Hmm.
Gemini. And we see it in a different way, with
Hmm.
this earlier time period that we're talking about now. I think about, like, well, what if we can't get along? Like, what if we do have irreconcilable, oh my God, irreconcilable. I can't say that word today. You're
Irreconcilable.
with
Yes.
me. You're with me. You're
Yeah.
with me. Yeah, like what if we can't figure it out? What if maybe we just need to separate? Um,
Hmm.
and so yeah, that's what's coming to mind for me. And again, the same things we talked about with the more recent period where we do see fighting. You know, we see people unable to agree ideologically, um, but we also see innovation.
Hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. There's always going to be, particularly because it's Gemini, that duality, and Uranus is essentially like a conduit, essentially I think allows Gemini to express all the more purely. I think. I mean, I wouldn't describe Uranus to rule any sign. Like some people say that it rules Aquarius, and then some would say maybe it would be exalted in Gemini. I think that there's a very strong affinity between Uranian and Gemini in energy. Especially some people attribute Uranus to being the so-called the higher octave of Mercury. I don't know that I agree with that necessarily, but there's definitely a mercurial and Uranian resonance there in different ways, ruling the individual, and just information, all of these things. I want to maybe move into, well, let's see. There is one more period I wanted to cover, I guess, before I go into the more relevant themes for this 2025, 2026, moving into 2033 period. We still have a little bit of time here. So let's see, 1774 to 1782 would be the period of the American Revolution against the British, as well as the build up to the French Revolution to overthrow King Louis the 16th in 1792. Also, the beginning of the British abolitionist movement. The movement was also part of the broader abolition movement between 1783 and 1888, which was chiefly responsible for the creating of the emotional climate necessary for ending the transatlantic slave trade. And so, even again, if it's just a seeding moment for what's later to come, you could see that Uranian, seed being planted there to want to break a norm of something. Because, this as strange as that may seem, that's very counter-normative, because it's amazing to think about how that was conceived as such a normal thing to have slaves. So to be anti-slavery was actually considered counter-normative at that time, as amazing as that may seem. So there is kind of that, like Prometheus, defying the gods to bring fire to mankind, to uplift humanity from that state to better its life, to this idea of people, certain people in these movements becoming Promethean like figures to uplift other portions of humanity that are still being subjugated and oppressed. So there's that liberator archetype, very beautifully expressed through Uranus in general. In Gemini, again, maybe giving it more of an outlet through speech and the means of disseminating information more widely, more diverse conversations about certain matters, right? So yeah, that was basically all I wanted to say, because I don't want to focus too much on the history, but just give it context, because I think it really helps to see the patterns that reoccur, because all three of these phases we've seen this as far back as we can track it. There are always echoes of the previous phase in the next one. So again, now going back from the 40s, we're going to see echoes of what happened around the end of World War II. Now, I mean, we're already seeing kind of dare I say, the very beginnings possibly of World War III, unfortunately, kind of, that's been being poked at for the longest time, but this last week, the events that have taken place, and well, really since the beginning of the 2020s, we can already see that was fomenting already, with tensions with Russia and all that, Middle East. Yeah. Let's see. Again, we're not sugarcoating this. So just to state a fact, the U.S. has always been involved in a major war whenever it's had its Uranus return. So as I said earlier, the 18th century was the Revolutionary War, the 19th century, the Civil War, and the 20th century, World War I and World War II, which was more of a fight for the control of world politics and economics. Now, in the 21st century, with this proxy war with Iran, Russia, and China, suggesting World War III, as I just said, just sitting there on the horizon. There's that fight for kind of the geopolitical regions, control for resources, becoming themes here coming out of Uranus and Taurus, which has had a lot to do with resources. And like I said before, what started in Uranus and Taurus will carry into Uranus and Gemini now. So, but by no means is anything that started there just going to end. It's definitely just the beginning of all that. So we always already seeing also the beginnings of civil unrest and economic instability, which could potentially lead to another sort of Great Depression of sorts, with all the civil unrest we saw unleashed in Los Angeles, and have seen already in previous years as well in other parts of the country, with major protests and just a split, essentially ideologically, that already has been brewing since maybe as far back as 2016, if not
Hmm.
before then. That's all just been building. Now with Uranus returning to Gemini, it's like I believe the climax moment of where all that tension is just going to erupt, really, especially once it trines Pluto. I think that's going to maybe be the trigger release point of all that. Just speaking. Go ahead. Yeah, if you have a comment on.
Yeah, the trine gives me hope. You
Yeah.
know, the trine really gives me hope for a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, just to kind of back off and like I think about the earliest time period that we talked about and like the coming together of different minds to craft these revolutionary documents, like the Declaration of Independence and um, other things. I think, I don't know, I don't want to embarrass myself and get the history wrong, but there were a lot of
Okay.
writings that came out at this time
Hmm.
that were that were revolutionary ideas about liberty and
Hmm.
human rights. And so now I think we could see that again. And all of the unrest that has been building up, as you were just talking about, it could lead to something really productive, especially because of this trine with Pluto, because that could mean to me that we finally have enough momentum to like do something with this. Like we've
Hmm.
had it. We've had it. We are coming together. We are figuring this out. And even what happened in LA, like that gave me a lot of hope, despite the fact that it was a horrible thing that happened and was happening. The
Hmm.
reason for everybody having to come together, it should have never happened. But the fact that the people came together and said, you are not going to do this to our community, that gives me hope. And it makes me think that while we're going to have to fight through some hard things, there is a lot of potential for coming together under some new idea of what it means, at least in America, to be an American, or what human rights really are, or yeah, what do we stand for? What are our values? And maybe that's the critiquing kind of questions that this round of Uranus and Gemini is going to ask us to consider.
Hmm. Certainly. With that, just because the polarization is so strong, what makes this really tricky is to also not fall into the whole pitting of two peoples against each other or two ideologies against each other, because that's a very easy thing that as much as people come together, and you could see that as a hopeful thing for a common cause, whether you agree with it or not. I'm not giving a political opinion here. There's also kind of the instigation of where, let's see, other powers can take advantage of that, because with Pluto in Aquarius, which is the sign of the people, I could read that as the people kind of uprising, but it's also
Right.
the certain powers funding all this and seeing that as a moment to use that chaos to then fuel their agendas as well. So it's kind of a
Yeah.
two-edged sword. That's kind of the thing with Gemini. It's very dual, so it can kind of go both ways. So the trick with this, I guess, is learning how to stand your ground and protect, your community and what's yours, and stand up for your values, but also with that not become cannon fodder for the state that wants to essentially use the huge divide that's been crafted and intentionally. It's been people have been pitted against each other. This huge divide
Yep.
has been, both sides of it have been fed over this period to generate more and more hate, because they want that to erupt and essentially kind of cause a kind of out of destruction. So let's not fight amongst each other. Let's try to settle our
Hmm.
differences and realize we have more in common. We actually have a common enemy. It's not each other. It really isn't. I mean,
Absolutely.
there's something else above us. Let's rise above that herd mentality. Let's take upon us the fire of Prometheus to raise our consciousness to see the bigger picture here, the bigger panorama, essentially, of what is actually at stake here. So
Absolutely.
again, with that, yes, I just encourage people to try to see the bigger picture here and not get caught up in your own personal politics, as much as you may be right. I mean, there's correct points on both sides. I see the people, particularly with the issues in LA, they have issues with immigration. I see both sides have very good arguments personally, and I think that's the thing about Gemini. There's a conversation taking place of
Hmm.
two people that have opposing. There's debate, so there's people that will argue for one side versus the other, and both maybe can come to a point of agreement that will maybe appease both, or at least come to agree to disagree for the sake of, let's all try to survive this instead of kill each other off because other people are just using us for that purpose, which is something I'm very much seeing here. That it's very easy to fall for this if it's not uh, not looked at very, very closely as to what actually is going on, because there's that trickery too. It's kind of the
Mm-hmm.
cosmic trickster. So Uranus, as much as it's benefic in the sense that it can spark revolution, again, this Promethean uh, benefic side of the archetype, it's also a trick. It's also deceptive. And then
Yeah.
bringing in the Neptune piece with Saturn in Aries. Once again, Neptune and Pisces, it definitely had a lot of deception. That's kind of dissolving now. It's moving into a different kind of ideology, more centered around the individual, and maybe the idea to fight for certain values about the individual. I'm kind of shifting topics here into Aries, but I think it's important to look at the astrology
Yeah.
holistically, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. There's a crusade vibe for me with Neptune and Aries. Like we are on a spiritual fight right now. And that,
yes.
it could be
Hmm.
really great because if we're all united, like you can't stop someone who's fighting for a spiritual cause. That's the
No.
one thing that like you're
Especially
not gonna,
someone who's willing to die for that cause, and that's the thing.
yes,
Uranus will invigorate someone to, in Aries particularly, will invigorate someone to die for a cause. Uranus was also, sorry, not Uranus. Neptune was also in Aries during the Civil War. That's something else I wanted to note, and that was during the time of, like, when I was talking about John Brown leading that raid on Harper's Ferry, even though it cost him his life. So similar echoes of that are likely to be seen of people uprising, willing to die for a cause.
right?
Martyrdom of some kind. Because Neptune is very, very much the archetype of martyrs,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the cause may be. It's
Mm-hmm.
you just kind of read it in context to the sign it's in. So being Aries, Aries has to do with war, so that quite literally would mean dying for a cause, or fighting for a cause at least, or taking up arms even for that.
I
Yeah.
think the point you were making a moment ago about not getting caught up in who's right or who's wrong is so vital. Like
Hmm.
astrology aside, we all need to internalize that, but
Hmm.
definitely with Uranus and Gemini, like because that is if we're talking about trickster energy, well, guess what?
Hmm.
Mercury can be that way too. And
Yep.
so um there is a deep potential for deceptiveness
Hmm.
and for even like deceiving yourself because you want to be right, and not being able to open your mind
Yep.
to another possible truth. And maybe that's I guess if we want to call like a higher potential for Gemini could be to see like two things could be true. But
Hmm.
it all depends on your willingness to accept that and to open your mind to that.
Hmm.
As a country, we're not great at that, I would say, at least right
Hmm.
now. And so maybe the situations that are coming down the pipe with this astrology will help us broaden our perspective.
Hmm.
Perhaps not without some fighting first, but yeah, I thought that was an excellent point.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's the thing. It's about balancing the hemispheres of the brain. There's people that are either left brain imbalanced or right brain imbalanced. And neither one is good, because neither one is holistic.
Mhm.
We want to have a holistic way of thinking. You have to have balance both the right and left hemispheres, and that's what Gemini is. It's the twin, so it's the two hemispheres of the body. It's the hands. So working with Gemini energy in that way, maybe taking this as an opportunity to do that, to break out of your paradigm. Stop taking sides,
Yeah.
stop holding, because you're part of the problem. If you're weighing in, I mean, you're polarized either way. If you're polarized to the left or the right, you're still part of the problem, because you're still feeding into the polarization and the divide. So really, as much as you want to think you're right, if that's the thing, if you prioritize that and you think that being right is more important than seeing the truth, it means you don't care about truth, and hence you're part of the problem, and you're obstructing the truth actually coming forth, which
Nailed it.
which you won't, because the truth always will prevail. You're honest, it's nothing. With lightning, it can destroy any illusion in a second. With one lightning flash, it's going to. I mean, the truth is going to come
Yeah.
inevitably. But do you want to be assisting that, or do you want to be obstructing that? Where do you want to be? It's not about trying to be on the right side of history here, because I don't know that there is a right side of history. I think that's kind of an illusion people have, that essentially history is just written by the victor. So really, that's kind of irrelevant. History is a very subjective thing that human beings agree upon. As it's been said, that history is just the lie that's agreed upon by the victor. Okay.
Yeah.
So never mind that. Let's evolve here. Let's take this as a period to really see things from a more cosmic view. Not this just very, very linear. Because time isn't linear. It's circular. Let's learn from the cycles. Let's not repeat the past. Let's look at what happened in the previous eras, and see that as a way to kind of get ahead of the times, in terms of being able to anticipate and therefore prepare. So
Yeah.
another point I wanted to bring with that, because I guess now to begin wrapping this up, a couple of things I wanted to say about this particular Uranus and Gemini period taking place from 2025 into 2026, which will be the final ingress of it. I have some dates I'm going to read here in a minute about that. Going into 2033, it will be the full transit. So coming from Taurus, which was about resources and how they're used, the air element speaks to communication and technology undergoing revolutionary shifts. So we kind of already addressed. Gemini rules the hands and Uranus rules genius, inventiveness, eccentric and creative types of people. So I see a potential for handmade things that have become more rare to increase in value and appreciation, perhaps. As we're all living in a very cheap made in China factory goods
Timu
coming
world.
through. Yeah,
Yeah.
that whole world. You order anything on Amazon, you get it the next day or whatever. To actually appreciate craftsmanship and things that take time, things that are made with the hands, again, things that will last. So I hope, and I see that as potentially a theme that will arise again with Uranus and Gemini, an appreciation of even of art in that way, art that actually
Yeah.
takes time with AI coming in and digitizing everything has really sapped a lot of the creativity and the human element out of art. So hopefully a bit of a renaissance in that way, of a return to really valuing the human creative, inventive qualities in physical things, physical items. Also, simple handmade inventions that may solve the energy dependence problem, which is an allegory of bringing
Mhm.
fire and liberation to solve the to bring free energy to millions of people worldwide, and actually have a very cool discovery here that I found. I recently saw this example. There's a Peruvian inventor named Hernan Asto who just created a device called Alinti. Alinti, look it up. It's a lamp which harvests the energy from plants during their photosynthesis. So it's
Amazing.
solar energy. So literally this little device he puts into like a bush with plants, and then it just powers up this lamp. People can plug in with a USB drive. They can plug in their phones, and he's been taking this into communities in Peru, and I'm part Peruvian, so that's why this is partly more relevant to me. That it was a joy to discover that there's a Peruvian that's taking this device into other communities that still don't have access to electricity in some places. So maybe this could be a final solution to that if it's not suppressed as many inventions like this have been in the past, because of course the people that have a monopoly on power and free energy have always been wanting to sabotage and keep a monopoly on that. So
Yeah.
maybe this little device like this or other things similar to this is just an example. I list of really genius, simple, handmade inventions that can really solve a lot of major problems like free energy. Again, the whole idea of electricity and energy being also very Uranian. Even though it just happened in Taurus, maybe the dissemination and more popularization of this device Alinti will actually take place with Uranus and Gemini. I don't know. I hope this guy gets support and maybe some contract or some way to be able to sell his device more readily to the whole world. Anyways, something to look into. Let's see, Uranus and Gemini being as much about AI and transhumanism on one hand, on the other hand is also, I think, a return to the grassroots way of living. This rebellious, self-sufficient, homestead, rejectors of the system, outcasts type of people. And I see homesteading becoming a much more popular thing now. People wanting to return to living, on the earth and actually producing for themselves, not being reliant on a system, especially on a food supply that might not be dependable for that much longer. Who knows?
Mhm.
So it's that ability to become inventive like that, maybe even use technology for farming on a smaller scale to produce for yourself and maybe for your small community. So there's that side to it. I already mentioned the trine to Pluto and Aquarius perfecting in 2027, which will augment this divide all the more. So there's going to be that split between the people that are going with the AI transhumanist timeline and the people that are sticking to the true human timeline. And then also in regards to education, I think it's going to be revolutionized completely
Mm.
from the traditional, like it'll probably go either fully online, where there will no longer be like brick and mortar schools, or because of this indoctrination and education just becoming not education. uh, Parents creating maybe co-ops or other small communities to educate their children themselves is going to become a movement. So taking homeschooling to a whole new level, where maybe it'll become a real trend and really catch on. And maybe, younger families maybe particularly will be able to just raise their kids themselves and teach them themselves the things they want them to learn, not have the state educate them or indoctrinate them, rather say. So, but either way, the use of technology, and probably a lot of maybe Zoom becoming a means for children to interact in sort of classrooms up on some scale, which I know has already been a thing. And in 2020, that's where all school lessons kind of went online. But again, that was maybe just the beginnings of this becoming the standard, maybe, and the standard norm, fully online education, or just maybe the ability for people to be able to take courses more so online to educate themselves at pace. So maybe no longer becoming like a standard school year. It's kind of like
Mm,
there's just education available. If you want it, you can log in and just work at your own pace according to what your lifestyle is, So there's no
mhm.
longer this whole summer vacation. There's just school whenever you do, and maybe even the whole range of grades. I'm just speaking just off the top of my mind here. Just
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the whole way of
So
educating kids is going to be very different.
I don't know if you know this. I teach high school English for my day job,
Oh,
and
really? Okay. No, I didn't
and
know that.
there's a lot of it's interesting because um, we're seeing a huge pushback actually with technology right now. I think in response to everything that happened with COVID, for example, where I live in Missouri, a law just passed where you literally cannot have a cell phone in a classroom. I don't know what that's going to look like because it passed
Hmm.
at the end of the school year. But I think the long story short is um, kids are spending all day at school on a screen, whether that's a Chromebook or their phone or whatever, and they're
Yep.
addicted. They
Yep.
are they're truly addicted. And I don't mean to sound like, oh, those kids, but like I see
No,
it.
it's the truth. It's
It's
the truth about
real.
their generation. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Unfortunately, and all the blue light affecting them too, because hitting their eyes constantly, that's
yeah.
affecting consciousness and a lot of other things. It's not good for you by any means at all. So I think
But I
the issue of school curriculum too, as much as you're saying about phones, but also there's going to be a movement for censorship, but then probably also a counter movement. It's like I said, it's both sides. So
And that's happening now already
yeah.
as well with book bans and all this kind of thing. It's been going on, but I think what you said about getting
Hmm.
innovative with the structure of school, like I could see that happening, especially as, and who knows what will happen with this, but the most recent House bill that's trying to get passed through the Senate includes a provision for vouchers, which would really be problematic for public schools because it would
Hmm.
divert money from public schools to private schools should parents choose to do it.
Hmm.
And so there might be some kind of competition, like what
Yeah.
can public schools do to remain, um, you know,
Well,
something
that's it.
people would want.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and that's interesting. I didn't know that, but that's speaking, I think, to this point. I think that's kind of the thing where it's coming to. I think the whole public school system is going to kind of meet its end. Like a lot of things are going to die. Essentially, a lot of things from the old world are just ending here. Essentially, either just due to lack of faith in them, or just in
Hmm.
this case, lack of funding too. And just because the times are shifting, so therefore education is shifting, and it's just no longer compatible with the energy of the times to have classrooms and public schools function the way that they have our real, there's obviously been a lot of problems with the public school system for a very long time. So eventually that's going to hit the fan and completely just crumble and dissolve. And again, the Neptunian element also tends to dissolve things. So I think Neptune Aries will maybe make education focused more on the individual and maybe even customizing how a child learns as an individual themselves, which I would advocate for, because myself being a child that got put into a one size fits all style of learning, which didn't suit me, due to myself now identifying as neurodivergent in a sense. So the way I learn is very different from other people. And I think there's a lot of people that can speak to that just school didn't really do them justice. They didn't really learn in the way that suited them. Maybe now a whole new method of educating children, evaluating them and seeing the best way they learn, and therefore then being able to apply a method that's suitable for that child, because rather than just throwing everybody in one classroom and assuming they're all going to do well, they're all going to meet the same standards. Because we're all so different. There really should never have been that blanket assumption that's just the only way to learn, because it's not. So again, revolutions in the classroom and in the way of educating. That was my last point on that. We're kind of coming up on time, but there was a few more points if I may make here on what I was talking about with that. I wanted to look at the charts of NATO and the UN, which I don't know that I'll have time to now, but I just wanted to mention that they both have Uranus in Gemini. Um, the chart for NATO, well, is for April 4th, 1949 at 4:30 p.m. cast in Washington, D.C. I think due to time, I'm not actually going to show it. I had it ready to go. I don't know. How good are you on time?
I'll need to go in about 5 minutes or so.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Sorry.
No worries. I mean, we've done great. We've really covered so much ground here. Again, I always over prepare than under prepare because there's just so much information about this that you could always endlessly talk about. But I just wanted to
Yeah.
mention the UN and NATO both have Uranus natally in their charts, so definitely pay attention to those organizations having some kind of disruptive, transformative, maybe ending on some level to how they function in the world. Um, the last point I wanted to mention that I spoke to you before we started was about something I heard astrologer Sam Reynolds mention in a presentation he did for Kepler College YouTube channel, which is he spoke to Uranus in the generations, where basically he says, quote, each generation is measured as the space between reproductive cycles of parents to children. That's about 35 years, end quote. So basically with this, one Uranus generation will activate in the generation 5 signs later, correspondent with the quincunx aspect, which is a 150-degree aspect. He refers to it as a coming of age aspect and compares it to the gibbous phase of the moon cycle, which is a sort of preparation of something coming into being. So you can think of it sort of as an apprenticeship, an initiation, or an activation. Those are some of the terms he used. Go watch that presentation if you're interested on it. He did a whole presentation on Uranus and Gemini, and this is just one really interesting point of many he made. So quickly here, I want to just speak upon the last three Uranus generations. So Uranus in Scorpio, which was active between November of 1974 to November of 1981, give or take. Oftentimes there's retrogrades that come and go, but that was roughly if you were born between those dates, November 1974 to November of 1981. Uranus in Scorpio activated then in Aries, which we saw the manifestation of the Occupy Wall Street movement, the Arab Spring, spike in gun violence, and populist risings of extremes, in political candidates or what have you. Look into that more if you like. The Uranus in Sagittarius transit from November of 1981 to around December of 1988, which activated with Uranus in Taurus, bringing about themes of redrawing of cultural divisions, the return of the Cold War, essentially, a concern with currencies and new visions for them, as well as the preservation of resources. So look into those periods, and then the one corresponding to it, because essentially it's like the Uranus and Sagittarius, let's say that was like the seeding moment, and then the kind of manifestation of that, or when that generation finally comes into being, coming of age, and they actually participate. This is sort of the under Taurus was sort of the fulfillment, or is, because we're not quite out of the woods with that yet. It's sort of the fulfillment of what they were born into to fulfill, because Uranus, it's a collective planet. It generally represents more collective signatures, though it can also be about the individual. But just because they're generational like this, oftentimes it'll manifest more through a specific generation. So then the last one I wanted to talk about was our current generation. We're Uranus in Capricorn. So yep, I was born right at the very beginning of it. So this is from December 3rd, I have here, 2nd or 3rd of 1988. Uranus entered Capricorn until about January 12th of 1996. So if you're born between those dates, this speaks to you. It will activate with Uranus in Gemini coming now, which during the Uranus in Capricorn, we saw the beginnings of the World Wide Web. So now essentially the internet is having a sort of secondary kind of culminating phase, or second activation, you could say, kind of, which of course now the internet has permeated almost everything, and it's a crucial part of life. But right as our generation was born, was the very beginning of the emergence of that. So to kind of follow that and track that development would be very interesting. And then things like NAFTA being signed in by President Clinton, which had to do with free trade agreements. So another thing to look at, just different things that were seeded. So different trade agreements or contracts or whatever other legislation that came about during that time will now meet a period where something comes to that. So now we're seeing the themes of nations splitting apart
Mhm.
now with Uranus and Gemini, and others coming together as well. Because so this, Gemini separates but and divides, but also brings and unifies, bring things together. We're seeing this new age of technology emerging, with the word trans being very, very important, however you want to use that. Uh, um, Transhumanism, I don't know, transportation there. I mean, even of course the whole transgender thing as well. I mean, anything that has to do with kind of a coming into something else. It's sort of this transitional, right? Energy very much in this case.
Mhm.
And all these things becoming much more relevant and prominent now with Uranus and Gemini, which I know under Taurus already we saw the seedings of that. But do you have a comment on that, on what will come now with this, with the Gemini era?
Yeah, I think the things that I'm most anticipating with this, like as we've said, there's going to be a lot of dialogue. There's going to be a lot
Hmm.
of new ideas. I do think that there will be changes with the internet,
Hmm.
and how it works. And given the trine to Pluto, I'm hopeful that there will be some kind of change in regards to data, because I can see how
Hmm.
the way our data is being harvested and used is like the next big power struggle, right? And it's
Yeah.
already happening.
Yeah.
The way
Yeah.
that we're being advertised to and targeted and all of this. I am hopeful that there will be some change there. And there will maybe even be a way to transform our relationship to technology, because it, as you said, it really has become such it's part of all, like, everyday life. But I think it's massively underutilized in a lot of ways as well. Like the way that
Mm.
we're using it is really, I think, more often more destructive than constructive, um,
Hmm.
to distract us from.
Yes.
And there's just so much more potential for good. And so I'm hopeful, I'm just like really hanging my hat on this trine with Pluto, that there's going to be some kind of revolution there where we can, put some limits maybe on what big companies can do with our data, and we can start using the power of technology more constructively to solve some of these massive problems that are truly existential and really need our attention. Um, and so, yeah, I'm really hopeful that while it seems as though, based on the patterns, that there's going to be arguments, there's going to be conflict, that conflict can ultimately be productive and bring us to a new place where we can see, as you said earlier, the bigger picture here, and let that unite us. Really, and I know you said you don't want to get political. I probably already have showed my cards there, but um, the people have the power. The people can have
Yeah,
the power, right?
of course.
There's more of us than there are of the people in charge. And if we can, that feels like the core truth that maybe could become unlocked here is like, wow, there's a lot of us. What if we all banded together and
Yeah.
fought under a common ideology? What is that
Hmm.
ideology? And I think that maybe could be how it all begins.
Yeah. The trine of Pluto, I could see that very well happening because it really is up to the people. The trine, Pluto has to, or it's, let's say its nature is to empower oftentimes, right? And so
Yeah.
essentially it magnifies and takes things to extremes. So perhaps with that trine, from Pluto and Aquarius to Uranus and Gemini, will essentially kind of be imbued in with that energy of that realization that really the power is ours. It's not about the plutocracy and the oligarchs, that ultimately we have the power to define what rules us, essentially, even with
Hmm.
technology too, re-examining our relationship to technology. Like, is technology using you, or are you using technology? And you
Exactly.
always absolutely have that. You can turn off your phone whenever you want, put it away, maybe that a thing, where you fast from that more. I mean, I definitely want to be how should we say, realistic in terms to like we can't fall into an escapist nature because technology is here whether we like it or not. So it's not about
Right.
just wanting to get rid of it. It's here, and we have to. There's a good thing for it. There's a good reason for it being here. It's part of our era. It's a tool. It's just a matter of we defining our relationship to it. Is, I guess,
Right.
the
Yeah.
underlying message I'm trying to convey here. Uh, so yeah, the people have a choice. It's not necessarily about hoping and wishing. It's acting. We're all
Mhm.
members of this collective consciousness here, and so it all starts with the self. That's another Iranian signification. It's about the self, but maybe on a more cosmic level. So you want to change the world, start by changing yourself, master your own habits and your own relationship to technology, and take back your own power, yourself. Rather, don't give in to fear, don't give in to the propaganda, and essentially all the fear that's going to be propagated, because there's going to be a lot of confusing counter narratives. That's the other thing with fake news. Fake news is already a big deal now, and unfortunately
Yeah.
with AI, it's going to be even worse, because there's going to be a way to fabricate, let's see, even videos and or footage that may actually look real. So it will
Yep.
become very hard to discern what is and isn't. So that's where it comes to looking into yourself to discern what's true and what is actually reality. It's not out there, it's all within yourself. So, um, yeah,
Yeah.
the power, I guess the one trying to say, the power is yours. Ultimately, it is within you. So just to master yourself and take care of you, rather than getting caught up in one side of the argument. There'll be many debates, and it's fine to listen I would say listen to both. Don't take sides. I mean, if you do take sides, okay, but have good reasons for it. Don't just be emotionally manipulated into just getting on one bandwagon or another, because that's
Yeah.
just feeding into the problem more than anything else. Um, so, anyways, thank you for your comments on that. I really wanted to real quick mention the key dates just for people to either write down or just have on for reference.
Hmm.
For Uranus and Gemini, which will be active from now until 2033. So the first ingress is July 7th, 2025. Then on September 6th of 2025, Uranus will station retrograde. On November 8th, 2025, Uranus will re-ingress into Taurus to finish tying the last threads of that transit. Then February 4th, 2026, Uranus will station direct at 27 degrees Taurus. It will clear its shadow period and make final ingress into Gemini on April 26th of 2026. Then August 3rd of 2032 will be the first ingress into Cancer. December 12th of 2032 will be the retrograde back into Gemini, tying up the last threads of the transit. May 22nd of 2033 will be the final ingress into Cancer, which will then have fully concluded the Gemini transit of Uranus. I already mentioned the trine that's going to come about. A lot of other aspects too, because Uranus is going to be there for such a long time, and every lunation in Gemini will have that Uranian signature to it. Um, we'll see eclipses between the Gemini and Sagittarius axis, which will be very important.
Hmm.
Um, and Saturn, like I said before, will eventually, it's still in Aries, but in a few years' time, we'll move into Gemini as well, which will intensify that as well, and probably solidify a lot of the Gemini Uranus new signatures that were ruffled up. It'll probably help concretize that and bring it into a more solid and more lasting form. And yeah, all the other astrology we could get into, which I think now we are out of time. Um, But thank you for joining me today. We really covered so much today, and I'm really pleased with how the episode has turned out. I appreciate you taking the time to come on here and share your
Of
insights.
course.
Thank you, Jana.
Yeah.
Do you want to share any of your information of how people can reach you? Yeah, any services you offer?
Sure. Sure, yeah. So you can find me at Self Help Witch on Instagram, selfhelpwitch.com. I do offer readings, and I just launched something called Homecoming. It's a kind of all-inclusive spiritual self-reclamation program. So inside there's a course, and it's got kind of walks you through how to reconnect with yourself on a spiritual level and then embody that. So not just understanding or like gaining knowledge, but actual embodiment. And then it
Mhm.
comes with a community, and you get 4 quarterly calls with me. So really like high touch support, and lifetime access to everything inside as well. So that's like my main thing right now, but you can definitely just book a reading with me, and I've got other stuff too. So you can find all that on my website.
Okay, very good. Do you have a YouTube channel as well?
I do.
Yeah,
Yes.
right,
Self
right.
Help
So the
Witch.
All right, yeah. So people can find you on YouTube, Instagram, all the main platforms.
Substack, yeah, I'm everywhere.
Substack, yeah. That's where I mainly am. This podcast started on Substack, and it's mainly where it's at. Though I also have a YouTube channel as well that I'm trying to grow. But okay, again, thank you for joining me today. I wish you the
Absolutely.
best in your Uranus and Gemini transit.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Well, take care.
You too.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining the podcast. As above, so below, as within, as without. Until next time.